Hey, have a video on something a bit funnier or a wee bit more light-hearted and a bit more away from politics. The moon landing in 1969. Um, there's a lot of people say it's a hoax. My own balanced judgment is what I did find, I examined it recently, was that the footage is not shot on the moon. I could prove that. It's not shot on the moon. Now, then you could say, well, maybe they shot it down on the ground in a studio, but they did actually go to the moon. Now, Elon Musk, who's big into space, has said recently that if you were to send a rocket to the moon, you'd have to send another one, 8 more up to fuel it. That it'd need 8 similar rockets to fuel it to get to the moon and back. And yet Apollo went with just a few gallons in the tank. Nearly all videos on YouTube are pro-landing. Now, here's the thing. Supposing when Kennedy came out in 1961, he was a year into his presidency. He was going to be out of the presidency by 1968. By 1969, he was going to be an ex-president, John F. Kennedy. But he was killed, as you know. He was killed in 1963. So, when he said we'll go to the moon within this decade and come back, off went NASA, and there was huge tension between Russia and the United States, and NASA claimed they went to the moon, and the idea was to show the Russians we're top. The other thing is that the dollar hegemony, the dollar dominance, was a very important thing for the Americans in that period, to keep the dollar as top. And there's still wars over that dollar and BRICS currencies and Trump trying to keep it and all of that. But convincing people they could go to the moon definitely restored confidence in the dollar. Now, a year after the moon landing, well, it might be 2 now, tell you the truth, Nixon broke away from the gold standard. So they needed confidence in the dollar by going to the moon and by pulling off such a spectacular feat. Now, just consider for a minute, if NASA and the American government knew it was a hoax, one thing they had on their side was they would have known that in 53 or 4 years more, nobody could prove it wasn't. And I want to plant this idea that no men or people will go beyond low Earth orbit for the next 15,000 years. In other words, as we wait for more people to go into space, it'll never happen in our lifetime or our great-great-grandchildren's lifetime because it's impossible. If NASA knew that, they were safe faking the moon landing, because what would have caught them out is if some other country went up as well. Now, you could argue that a country like China could send an unmarked mission and land it near the Apollo, but there doesn't seem to be any interest in that. But the Chinese did say about 6 years ago that they could find no sign of the Apollo on the moon. The only evidence that Apollo remains are on the moon comes from American sources. So what I'm making, and it's extreme to say 15 million years or 15,000 years, certainly it looks that there'll be no going back to the moon within the lifetime of the youngest baby alive today. Now, I made the point about the lunar lander legs, and I'm used to using JCBs and adopted Massey Ferguson diggers and all that. The legs on the lander, when it came down, should have spread out. They should have done this, right? Look, they should have spread. See? They didn't. They just landed down nice and neat. Just popped down. That's impossible. There was no flame from the 2 ascent vehicles from Apollo 15 or 17. That's impossible. That's a hypergolic rocket. There has to be a large flame. It was obviously lifted up on a winch. Now, but that's not the biggest thing. They never went back since. Now, there was an armatist mission a couple of years ago. It's only about 2 years ago. And I saw the footage of it, and I read up about it, and they had an effigy of a man and a woman, and the idea was to see how solar radiation would affect the bodies of men and women. They went up, they flew around outside low Earth orbit, and it came back. And that's the last we heard. Wouldn't you think that if they found that the radiation was not dangerous, or that the particles in space was not dangerous, they'd have said, a very good result there now. There's 2 videos of NASA personnel on YouTube, maybe I try and post them, saying that we'd go straight away to the moon in the morning, but we can't get over the radiation and the harsh effects of space. Now, the Earth has a magnetic core, has an iron core, which is magnetic. And it has what they call the Van Allen belt. And the Van Allen belt meets at the poles, and it goes round like a donut. Like a donut. Now, when it was brought up, long after Apollo, that the craft, this is concentrated. What happens is the solar, now this is just where I'm writing something else. The solar rays come in this way, and the Van Allen belt deflects them so that they're deflected round. And then they go off after having been stopped by this. So it's a bit like one of those draper doors. You know, the doors that drape down, they block it. Now, when this came out, somebody tried to say that they didn't go that way, that they went up over the pole this way. I can tell you there was never any doubt what happened. The crafts took off from Florida, USA. They flew out over the Atlantic, across roughly the Sahara or the sub-Sahara desert of Africa. More or less Nigeria, that kind of area, maybe even Nigeria, and on out over Uganda, that general area. And they went round the Earth 1.5 times before they fired their boosters and cut off from the main rocket and headed up into space, according to NASA. So that's a lie. They did not go up over the poles. That would have meant when they took off, they'd have to take a left turn. Moreover, when you launch a rocket into space, you have to launch it in the direction of the rotation of the Earth, because that gives the rocket extra speed. It's already speeding when it takes off. If you put it the other way, it'd never get up into space because the Earth is revolving the wrong way. So it's like if you're trying to climb up on a tree and your foot was slipping, as opposed to getting a good grip by going in the rotation of the Earth. So they lied about that. Now, Elon Musk says it couldn't be done. You couldn't get the fuel to do it. Now, it's very strange there's no word of any of this. Now, all kinds of things are put forward, but what the pro-moon landing people are saying now, they're looking at things like the flag, or the flag is supposed to have waved, or there was a piece of stainless steel holding it up. They're not looking at the pieces that I identified. The lack of scraping. But the other thing that convinces me that it's a hoax is that the Russians went up with unmanned crafts, and they reported that the moon is not silver, it is browny red. But we had no footage. The Chinese went up with what they call CHINGE, changed, those 1, 2, 3 and 4, I think, unmanned missions, and they were successful. I do believe everything NASA says about unmanned missions, such as Voyager, the one to check out the sun. A lot of that is very good, and a lot of information published is very useful. I don't believe that's faked. I don't believe the Chinese faked it or anyone else. Several efforts by India, Britain to land such crafts have failed. They turned over. Very hard to land an unmanned craft, and having people in it doesn't really make it any better. But when NASA sent the astronauts, so-called, through the Van Allen belt and out into space, which is still dangerous, they never asked them how they felt. They never said after a couple of days, what's the form like there, lads? Are you having any bad effects? No. They never asked them anything. When you think they'd be a little bit worried, because the Van Allen belt was known about at that time. They never asked them that question. There were no ill health effects. Now you look up on a clear night up into the sky and you can see shooting stars. And they're really, some of them can be the size of the engine of a car. I saw one a few years ago, very, very big, streaming across. I saw the Bove meteorite in 1969, and I saw it in the museum in London, and it was the size of a car battery, made of iron. But most of them are only like grains of rice. Now they're going far faster than the fastest bullet available. And if any of those hit an astronaut, he would either be dead if it hit his head or heart, or if it hit him on the leg, it would pierce his leg, pierce the craft and pierce everything. It takes a lot of metal to stop them. Yet that risk was taken. The risk was taken, and they won't take it now. But the big thing is, my prediction, no matter what happened, the youngest child alive today will never see people going beyond low Earth orbit. No person other than Apollo have gone beyond low Earth orbit ever. Ever. And it's 1969, 56 years, and they say they went then. There was an experiment carried out on one of the Apollo missions, and it showed the astronauts dropping a feather and a hammer to prove Galileo's experiment. And that was done 2 months after the United States, somewhere over around Indiana, over Midwest, opened a vacuum chamber, which is an extremely difficult thing to build. They hadn't it opened 2 months till the astronauts were dropping the hammer and the feather. There was no background. Could have been all staged in this building. And there's still a lot of speculation about it. They call people who deny it, what do you call them, conspiracy theorists. As if Richard Milhous Nixon wouldn't tell a lie. But look at the benefit. Secured the position of the United States militarily at a time when it was flagging over Vietnam. Secured and strengthened their position vis-a-vis the Russians. The reflector on the moon is baloney. You don't need a reflector on the moon. You can send a laser beam to the moon's surface and measure the distance without any reflector. The Russians say they put a reflector on the moon with an unmanned craft. They say they were back 350 kilos of rock. That's a colossal amount. And they say it's been examined. By whom? Did you ever see any of it? Did they ever take a piece of it and let it go round the world and be seen and touched by people? At least you could say, I felt a bit of the moon, smell it. No, it's completely kept out of touch. Neil Armstrong gave a piece of it to a Dutch museum and it was petrified wood. Fake. It doesn't add up. But the bottom line is, to go to the moon and come back would require an amount of fuel at least 9 times what they had. And they didn't have it. They had only, the computers they had at the time were less powerful than this mobile phone that I'm recording this on. And they admit they can't go back because of the severe environment above the earth. And they lie about the course they took. They did not come out over the Atlantic Ocean, over the Caribbean and turn left. That is a ridiculous thing to say. They went straight across Africa and came round in low Earth orbit and fired after 1.5 times. So they went right around and went back, probably over somewhere over the Pacific Ocean the second time, and then they fired, and that's supposed to have driven them on to the moon. The amount that would only get them started, the amount of fuel they'd need then to get them up to the moon, to stay on course, to get into orbit around the moon, and to lift up and come back, couldn't be carried on one rocket. It'd be too heavy. It'd be too heavy. And before I sign off, some of the footage, the video footage, was black and white. At that time, black and white televisions were as common as dishwater. About 7 years later, the colour television came in. The colour television came in about 1979. Big time. Pubs had them 1977. Snooker caught on as a spectator sport because they could see the colour of the balls. The footage they took on the moon is poor quality. But, while the movie film is black and white, the stills is chemical film. It's ordinary camera chemicals. And there's several instances of colour there, including the United States flag and a photograph showing the flag and the earth, and a number of other still photographs in colour. And the colour of the moon's surface in those films is silver, white, and black. In some shady areas, it's black. On the rocks that are sticking up and hit by the sun, it's a brilliant white. And the surface is silver. It's only when they disturb the surface that you see a bit of grey. But the Chinese Chang'e mission confirmed what the Russians had said. The moon surface, the soil on the moon, is not that colour. It's a reddish brown. It's quite obvious. But when you look up at the moon from the Earth, you do not quite see that because the moon reflects sunlight very vividly. The moon is reddish brown, and they didn't know that. And the Chinese found it out, and the Russians commented on it. The Chinese and the Russians have no interest in debunking American baloney. The Russians, there was competition between the Russians and the Americans. The idea that the Russians were monitoring them up is a bit of a hoax that can't really be proven. And anyway, we don't deny there could have been an unmarked craft gone up there. All told, it's very, very strange. They've never gone back. And I predict, again, the youngest baby will never, ever live to see another person going beyond low Earth orbit. Not going to the moon, going beyond low Earth orbit. And they're talking on about going to Mars. Never, ever will it happen. And then you see stuff about aliens that came from here. There are no aliens. We are alone in the whole universe. Our presence here is by a very, very rare coincidence and set of coincidences, and maybe by the hand of God. Then there's the extremes of temperature. How you could survive in temperature of 200 degrees centigrade. Look at, if you told it to an ass, he would kick you, and fewer people are believing it. But the main point to remember is, if it's a hoax, when they pulled off that hoax, the one thing they knew was there'd be nobody going back up there again in the lifetime or in the lifetime of several generations. And that is proven to be right, and that's my prediction. We'll never go not only to the moon, but beyond low Earth orbit. It's only for a bit of fun, but folks, this is not necessarily the same as proving the windmills are a scam, or that a lot of what goes on is a scam, but it's still of interest to think that the United States wouldn't lie to us. Are you joking me? And it's still relevant because the dollar is on the line at the moment. It's under threat. We'll see you back soon. Bye bye. Thank you.